It is officially a few days into the NFL Combine starts in Indianapolis, and it is time to ramp up to that event. And there is no better person to help in the process of getting ready for what's going to happen in Indianapolis than our draft expert here at The Athletic, Dane Brugler. Dan, you're spending 20 days there. I'm assuming you're already there, even though the Combine starts in like 4 days. How are you feeling as we get toward another year in Indy for the Combine?
I can't wait. I mean, this is such a fun event for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, there's just so many different ways to attack this week, but it's a nonstop fact finding mission the entire process. And this week, there's a lot more to figure out. There's a lot more opportunities to figure stuff out. So no, I cannot wait. Indy's such a great host. I'm so happy that it's there this year, and then I think the next year, maybe another year. But there's nobody wants this moved. Nobody. So the fact that we're still going to Indianapolis every year is awesome. Even though it's frigid cold, there's snow on the ground. It's still. I'd rather it be nowhere else in the country than Indianapolis.
How many combines is this for you?
This will be 15 for me. My first was 2011. Cam Newton, Von Miller, and that was, Lucas Oil Stadium was there. That was built. But I think for the media side of it, we would do all the media availability in the stadium. Like there was a big workroom, and
They used to do it on
now,
the club level. It used to just the club
yeah,
level was open, and they had
yep,
tables on one side, and then they had these kind of makeshift podiums just on a single level of the stadium. That's how it was
right,
for probably the first 3 or 4 that I went to. I vividly remember the 2009 class because I remember Mark Sanchez just being very charming during his media availability at the podium and on that club level. I can't remember which year they switched it.
yeah. I mean, at a certain point, it just became too much because they
Yeah.
don't say no to credentials. Basically, I mean, they just and I get it. Like it's good for a lot of young guys coming up that want to cover the draft, and like that's awesome. Um, Sometimes it has a little bit of a feel of uh like the Super Bowl media day where you're getting some bizarre questions and it's like, all right, who let this guy in? Like we're actually trying to talk to this player. And so some of it gets a little much at times. It gets a little crowded, but yeah, I mean, it's just fun to have access to 330 guys and be able to talk to them and kind of fill in the gaps. So yeah, it's a crazy week.
Derek, you've been to a few of these now. How many combines is this for you? Because this was your first Super Bowl this year, but I remember talking to you in Indy multiple different times, so I know this is not your first go around for the combine.
I think my first one was 2020, which is funny because that was like it happens right
Oh
before
yeah,
we shut the entire country down for COVID. So
we
I
have
think I
no
went to
idea how many
2020.
people got COVID that week.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was looking back on it, it was a very funny experience. And then
We're all just in crowded rooms yelling at each other.
yes, the entire thing is everybody just packed in like sardines, and so probably that might have been ground zero. Who knows? Um, so I went to that one. I think because everything was shut down the year after, I didn't go to that one, but then I've been to everyone since then. So maybe 4 or 5 if my math is correct there. And then this is my first one though, like you said, after the Super Bowl. So energy levels are a little bit different here, I think, this go around than last time. So we'll see how it goes.
The idea that it's only 2 weeks between the combine and the Super Bowl now is it's tough. It's tough. It's hard to bounce back for that level of travel. And for me, it's that level of social stamina. Like, as a man in his late 30s now who spends, I think, a reasonable amount of time in public, but also a lot of time at home based on where I'm at in my life, being out up and about for like 5 straight nights twice within a month-long period and having to have extended conversations with people that many times in that short of a period of time, I just don't have it anymore. Like it just takes so much out of me to talk for that long to a bunch of people, not even strangers, like people I like and want to see. But if we could just space it out by like 2 more weeks, I feel like my social battery would be recharged by that point.
I can relate with that so much, just because I'm used to talking to like 5-year-olds, at home. So like the opportunity to talk to adults is great, but at the same time, like maybe we're talking about different things because my mind's somewhere or a different place, and it's just different than it was 5-6 years ago. Yeah, it's definitely a lot because it's a relationship business, and so there's a lot of that. That's a big part of the week.
There are some people I know that are a little bit younger than me who've been doing this for a while where they can just be out till 3 in the morning every single night. I won't name names, but there are people I know in the media that I'm always impressed by their ability to just go that hard every single night. I always tell people now, I got one night. I got one 4 a.m. night at Prime in me that over the course of the entire week. I got one. That's it. I used to be able to do it every single night. Now I have exactly one, and it's just about figuring out where the pointed strike during the week is going to be. Like, I know when it's coming. By like 4 p.m. that day, I know whether I'm going to have it in me, but there's only one shot now, where there used to be like 4 or 5.
My first week in India, I learned very fast that you can only have one of those nights, and so now it's ever since then, since like 2022 and on, I've like paced myself like, all right, you get one 4 a.m. night, otherwise we got to get to interviews and stuff in the morning.
I give you credit because my personal rule in Indianapolis for me is I'm not allowed to say no because there's
Oh
there's
man,
just because this week is just so important to everything I do throughout the entire year that I do not let myself say no. If it's if I get a text, if I get this, that, whatever it is, I'm not going to say no because you don't know what it might lead to. And so for me, and trust me, I regret it often, but there are a lot of times where I have said yes, and it's turned out to be something really advantageous. So, yeah, that's just my own personal rule for the week.
There used to be a time when I would tell myself, oh, I'll just talk to people at night. It'll be 2 a.m. and I'll be talking to this coach and it'll be a really productive conversation. Just lying to myself the entire time. As
right.
I've gotten older, I've realized that more coffees and more lunches is the best way to be productive
Yes.
when I'm in Indianapolis. So now this is a Mike Sando thing. I remember years ago just watching like Mike work at this, I won't tell exactly where, Mike working at a coffee establishment somewhere in Indianapolis and just watching him do like almost a car wash of people coming through and talking to him. And I was like, that's how you do it. Like, that's
Yep.
the right way to go about this. So now there's a lot of like, do you want to meet for coffee at 9 a.m.? Because I think that's, again, a more productive time and a more realistic time for me to be at my best, considering the age and just how worn down I am these days. Dane,
Well,
I
that's
want
why I
you to
get in
just,
on
oh, go
Sunday.
ahead.
No, I say
Yeah,
that's why I get on Sunday because Monday, Tuesday, I load up on meetings. That's all I do I mean, most days it's at least 15, 16, 17 meetings of
good Lord.
some of it's 15 minutes for coffee. I mean, I say
Who are
I'm
these
not a
people? I'm just because I was going to ask you how you spend your time. So share as much
yeah.
or as little as you want to, but I think people would be interested in like what your schedule is over the course of that week, considering you're spending 8 days there.
I mean, some days I'm eating 3 lunches, like that's just how it works out. But yeah, scouts, agents, coaches, a lot of these guys, like I said, this is my 15th combine. I know, there's so many people that I'm friends with, and I talk to them throughout the year, but this is maybe the one time I get some FaceTime with them. And so it's great
Same.
to catch up with them. Some of these guys, or some of these people that I meet with are more, I haven't met with them before. It's more networking and meeting new people in the analytics space or, different, there's so many different data tracking companies now and meeting with those people and just so many different types of people to meet with because everybody's here. Everybody's in Indianapolis this week. And so it's just a great chance a lot of learning opportunities, a lot of chance to catch up. And that's what makes Indy so great. It's so walkable and accessible that you can have a meeting one place and for 15 minutes and then somewhere else for 50. Like it's very easy to navigate. So yeah, I get it on Sundays, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. It's just nothing but meetings, meetings, meetings. And I mean, just a little bit behind the scenes, our athletic staff, a lot of us, our NFL staff, we are in Indianapolis. This is kind of like the one time a year where everybody's there. And we have a lot of athletic, different events and things like that, get-togethers and meetings and things like that. And I have yet to attend a single one because I cannot. I feel there are people that at the Athletic that I work with daily, and I still don't know. I've never met them in person because when I'm in Indianapolis, there's so much other things there. My meeting is just, and the bosses understand. It's not like I'm skipping out or anything. They understand. Like this is what I need to do this week. But that kind of sums it up. Tuesday, Wednesday is when I hit Radio Row. That's where I don't know. It's crazy how much it's back in 2011, my first combine, there wasn't a Radio Row. There wasn't anything like that. Now it's like kind of
There's
like
like 4 tables outside. when you would walk into that club level, there were like 4
Right.
different tables out at
Back in
front
the
where you would
day.
get your credentials. It was like Sirius XM and then like 2 other radio places, and that was it.
Yep.
Like, that was the entirety of the media presence from an audio
Now
perspective.
there's 50, 60 tables. I mean, it's packed with, the team websites and different radio stations and different streamers and things like that. So, I last year I did over 50 interviews in those 2.5 day span. So
Mhm.
knock a lot of those out. Last year I did a hit or two on NFL Network, go over to the stadium, do that. A lot of great people. It was fun to catch up with them. Wednesday is when the prospect interviews start. So all 330 combine guys, they'll roll through the convention center. 90% of these guys I've already talked to, but there's always a few where just kind of need to fill in the gaps in a scouting report, or maybe a junior who I didn't anticipate declaring. I haven't talked to him yet, so it's great to just get FaceTime with those guys, catch up, get some of the key questions answered that maybe I was missing. And then Thursday starts the on-field workout. So I'm in Lucas Oil Stadium in the stands. We're watching drills. A few years ago, they experimented with the drills at night, because if they can make
Mhm.
money off of it, they're going to. And so make it a TV event and all that. Thankfully, they changed it. So now it's back in the afternoons. I think it starts around 3 Eastern, which I think is a good starting time. It's an exhausting week. And so this way, you're working late, but still have time. If you need to go out afterwards, you can do that. If you need to go back and finish up, you can do that. You're not working. You're not at Lucas Oil Stadium until 2 a.m, which is great.
I think
Try to
coaches
work.
and people hated that. I
Oh
I
yeah.
think people really dislike the night workouts, and that's why they've shifted away from it.
The only positive feedback I heard was, you could sleep in if you wanted, because there wasn't as much stuff in the mornings because everything started later. But there's a reason it only lasted 1 year. It just, I understand why they experimented with it, but I'm glad we've settled on this kind of afternoon time. And Saturday, Sunday, I think, are a little bit earlier. It's every week, try to fit in at least one, if not two steak dinners, try to hit up St. Elmo's, try to hit up, these different places. But yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, that's the week.
So just before we get into this, and the goal here is kind of to get things on people's radars for what they should be watching next week. And to do that, we're going to tap into what you're watching over the next week and what you're paying attention to. But before we dig into some of those specifics, I just want to take a quick second to lay out what this event is actually for in
Right.
2025. Before we started recording, I was talking to you guys about some staffs that I was trying to reach out to people, set up conversations like, oh yeah, we're not going this year. And that seems to be more and more prevalent among these NFL teams. Obviously, the Rams are one of the first teams that their coaches just didn't go. They just didn't, were not a part of the combine. And, you see that starting to trickle down to all of the McVay tree teams. There's some of them that are just like, we don't do this anymore. We didn't do it in LA. We're not going to do it now. So as we've gotten to this place where the process is a little bit more modernized, teams have more information outside of what they can get at the combine. If you're just trying to sum up, Dane, why teams still like this and what usage and utility this event still has, what would you say to people?
Well, I think that first we have to remember like what the purpose of the combine is, right? The whole purpose of why the combine was invented was for the medicals, and this was back in the early '80s, a way to get all the players together in one neutral spot where instead of having every player go to each team facility for a medical evaluation, they have everybody in one spot. They can get it done. It's another reason why Indianapolis is the perfect city, because it's one of the few places that has access to enough medical equipment, because you're doing 300 MRIs, you're doing so many different tests all within 4-day period. So another reason why Indianapolis is the perfect site. But I mean, that's why the combine was created in the first place. And then it's like, okay, well, while we're here, let's do these interviews. And I think that's the medicals and the interviews, the two most important parts of this combine. And the interview portion is, it's a little bit like speed dating. There's an informal period and a formal period. The formal period is each team has 45 18-minute sit down interviews to request, and each player gets a schedule that they're kind of escorted around Lucas Oil Stadium to each suite where the team is, and that's where they have a chance to sit down with coaches. And that's where I think the value is the most, especially if you are looking at a quarterback. You want to be able to meet with these guys in person. You want to be able to throw up on the whiteboard, on a screen, watch his tape, say, what do you see here? What are you working through here? And just, but there's so much preparation that goes into that. Because again, these are 18-minute interviews. So you have to be able to understand, get to the point, know what you want to ask. So a lot of preparation goes into that. And then, of course, there's the workouts and the testing. That's probably the sexiest part of the combine, to the public. And it's, I think it's a little bit misunderstood because every player is a little bit different with how they test. And I think the overall, we have to look at the combine as one big cross-checking exercise. It's what you see at the combine match up with what the tape says. And if you think a guy is a great athlete, you're not going to give him extra points at the combine for proving it. But if a player doesn't test well, or if maybe he tests better than expected, then you have to figure out the why. And so it's always helpful that we have the combine, the data from the combine, but then also just when you're watching the drills with your own eyes and you see it's one guy after another. So you have repetition, you have an immediate comparison, you have an immediate frame of reference to see how a guy is moving speed wise, change of direction, that kind of thing. So that's just kind of the brief synopsis of why I think the combine still matters here in 2025.
And that's such good framing that it's like a cross-checking event, because so much of what teams are doing from their perspective during the entire draft process is they're just trying to make the list of guys as short as possible. Whether it's when they first start with film, like, okay, that guy doesn't fit our system, this guy doesn't fit our system, whatever it is. And then you get to the medicals and it's like, okay, this guy doesn't pass our check, this guy doesn't pass our check. You get to the interviews, okay, this guy doesn't pass our check. And so, Dane, when you do it, you end up with like 600 guys on your board. But teams realistically only end up with like 150 because they've just crossed so many guys off of their board based on medicals, film, all this other stuff. And so the combine is like the spot to check as many of those guys off as possible. So that's such a good point.
No, and that's a great point because they've already been doing this. The last few weeks, all the scouts have been back at the team facility building a preliminary board, and that's where they cross off a lot of guys. I mean, I was texting a guy the other day about a certain player, and he said, "Yeah, solid player, but he's not on our board." And I was, "Oh, okay." Like it's just it's well, it could be scheme related. It could be there's so many different factors there. But yeah, I mean that's a great point. They've already go into this week crossing out a lot of players, and then the combine will let them do that even a little bit more.
How often are you surprised by what happens in Indianapolis? Whether it's by some of the physical testing where a guy is better or worse than you expected, or whether it's 2 or 3 weeks after the combine has ended and you start getting some of the feedback about interviews. I'm assuming that's where some of the surprises come, where maybe somebody comes off in a way that is a little bit unsuspecting for the teams when they start talking to guys. Is that where some of the blips maybe come up in the process typically?
Yeah, for the most part. It's okay to have fun with this process too. Like when Xavier Worthy ran that the 40-yard dash last year, like if you didn't get excited about that, like watching that, then like what are we doing? Like we knew he was fast. Okay, it wasn't a big surprise, but it's still okay to I think have fun with this. And so like that was a good example of that. But in terms of like actually surprises changing what you think about where a player is going to be drafted, yeah, I think most of that is the medical and the character stuff, and that's where things get a little murky. And I think, we'll talk more about that later. But it's, just today, texting with some scouts about some players, it's like, okay, well, I got to add this guy to my list now of guys that maybe not going to go as high as I thought because of there's this in his background or there's this and this, and it makes for a tough conversation from the outside looking in, where teams have maybe a better feel for it as they leave the combine.
Before we dig into the players, I want to share what Dane said to me about an hour ago as we were preparing for the show. He apologized for the amount of guys that he wanted to talk about as we go through these categories. It was the best thing I've heard all week. Like the fact that you're so excited to dig into this, that you're actively apologizing before we start. As somebody who is tasked with hosting the show, that it's just music to my ears. I'm very excited about this.
I might ramble, just whistle or give me a code word or something, and I'll shut up. But yeah, we'll try to keep it as, because at the same time I want to mention as many guys as possible, so people already have I think good mix or a good idea who to look at. But I also want to reserve the freaks for the freaks and the guys that have most to gain for the those types of guys. So we'll try to keep it as concise as possible.
Let's start with the freaks of the freaks. I want to get ahead of what the biggest storylines from the testing are going to be. The guys who are just going to absolutely blow this week away. And there's some subtleties and nuances between these categories as we dig into them. This is reserved for like the best of the best, the Xavier worthy sort of moments that we could potentially be anticipating this year. So, Dane, as you think about the guys who are going to own the combine, the ones we are going to be talking about, when you go on NFL.com or The Athletic, what are the little headlines going to be in the carousel because so-and-so did X, Y, and Z? Where do you start that process with the 2025 class?
I think we have to start with the edge rushers. This is going to be a freaky group, and I'm interested to see if Abdul Carter, Penn State, the guy that might go number 1 overall, what first of all, does he test? And if he does, what that's going to look like? Because, at 250, 255, the 40 should be awesome, but I'm most interested in the 10-yard split. I think, obviously that measures the get off, how quickly he's out of the gate, because that's what jumps out the most when you watch Carter on film is just the burst. And so how does that look in the 10-yard split? For reference, Von Miller was a 159. Jared Verse last year was a 159, which was a great time for Verse at 255 pounds. What is Carter going to look like? Is he going to be more like 155? Is he going to be closer to, is he get close to 150? So what does Abdul Carter do in the 10-yard split? That'll be big. And then the freakiest of the group is probably going to be Texas A&M's Shamar Stewart, 6'5", 281 pounds. The 40 is probably going to be ridiculous, maybe even 4.5s, which would be nuts for a guy that size. I think Travon Walker was 451 at 272. So Stewart, 10 pounds heavier, if he's able to get close to that, it is crazy. The 10-yard split with him should be pretty interesting. He's going to be Stewart, like his numbers should look close to Abdul Carter and some of these other guys, but he's 30 pounds heavier, which just kind of says how much of a freak he is. He's number 9 on my top 100, despite never having more than 1.5 sacks in a season. And so, the production might not be there, but the reason he's ranked so high is the traits are crazy. And you do see it on film. He led the team in pressures this year, even though the sack number was low. So Shamar Stewart should be one of the guys that we're talking a lot about. And then the 2 Georgia guys in the front 7, Jalen Walker, Mikael Williams, they're going to be really impressive. The measurements for Mikael, I think, might be close to Tyree Wilson, 6'5", 265. The arms, it might take 2 tape measurers to really get the arms for Mikael Williams, because they're nuts. It'll be over 35, maybe close to 36. We never actually got to see Tyree Wilson test, and he still went top 10. Williams, his body of work is inconsistent, like just in watching his tape. But if you grade to the flashes and you focus on the traits, this is why he might go in the top 10, or at least will be considered in the top 10. And so it'll be important for him for the freaky traits in the testing to match up what shows on tape. One more edge rusher too, Jordan Birch from Oregon. He's a guy that was banged up this year. He had a back out of the Senior Bowl, so I think it's been a little bit out of sight, out of mind, not being talked about a ton. But this guy can move, and he's a fluid 290 pounds, plays with juice, plays with power. I can't wait to see his movement skills in Indianapolis. He was number 51 on my top 100. So I think the buzz is really going to build. And then the guy who I might think might win the week, he might be the guy that comes away from this week as the winner, is Jihad Campbell from Alabama. Linebacker, pass rusher, can do a little bit of everything in the front 7. Sunburst, speed for days. The dude's just different. And I'm interested to see how close to Micah Parsons level testing does he get. And I know that's setting the bar high, and I don't think he'll get quite there, but how close does he get? And because when you scout him strictly as just an off-ball guy, it's a little complicated because the instincts aren't all the way yet. He's only been playing as a stacked off-ball linebacker for about 2 years. And so there are times where you can see him, he's a little bit late to react to certain things, but when he does see it and he unlocks and goes, it's crazy. And so some of his best stuff is when he rushes the passer. And so I wonder if we should be almost talking about him similar as Jalen Walker, a guy who, is another linebacker, but he's at his best rushing the passer. So when you scout him as strictly a linebacker, you can poke holes in his game, but when you look at him as a pass rusher, that's where the optimism just skyrockets. So I think another guy, the buzz is going to pick up and build for Campbell throughout the week.
I'm
I saw
so
you
glad you,
smiling at the Jahai Campbell thing,
dude.
Derek.
So I, for whatever reason, maybe just because like everybody in Dane's top 20 seems to be a front seven guy. That's kind of where I started my research on this class. And Campbell was maybe the fourth or fifth guy I watched. And when I heard former defensive end who runs the
Mhm.
way that he does and can move backwards the way that he does, and sometimes the instincts and coverage are a little bit up and down, but just like the pure ability to move backwards and laterally, I thought was insane. I was like, I would do anything to draft this player in the top 15. And so I'm so glad that Dane brought this guy up because I think in terms of like raw potential for his position, he is one of the most fascinating players in this entire class to me.
Dane, on a broad level, would you say that just the quality of the testing continues to increase year over year? Like guys are getting bigger, faster, stronger? And if that is the case, how do you contextualize that? Like, are we trying to compare guys now compared to what guys were testing 10 years ago? Is that useful as we're trying to like place what sort of prospects and athletes they are? How do you sort through all of that at this point?
Teams are asking themselves those same questions because the training and the science of it all has improved so much. I mean, there's so many experienced and just knowledgeable trainers who understand how to. I don't want to say cheat the system because that's not really what you're doing. You're getting these guys peak performance for these specific drills, and you could argue that it's sometimes it does interfere because okay, Ohio State, for example, they played to the national championship game. They have 15 guys this year that are going to get drafted. Several of those guys pulled out of the Senior Bowl because they were so far. They were 2 months behind, or no, like 6 weeks behind, where a lot of other prospects have been in terms of training for the combine. So instead of going to the Senior Bowl, they have to immediately go to their training facility and start training on the 40-yard dash, training with these different drills in order to get enough time to be ready for the combine in Indianapolis, which is a bummer because you want to see these guys in pads in a football setting like the Senior Bowl. But it's just how the calendar is working right now. So, but back, your original point about how do you contextualize the numbers, the data now compared to previous years? I mean, you just when you compare it to previous years, you just can't go back very far. I mean, I think you have to the last 3-4 years is when you really focus, which isn't a great frame of reference, but that's just the way things are with the way training has improved so much over the years.
And I feel like too, on a related note, Dane, fewer players seem to be doing certain drills now compared to
Mhm.
8 years ago. So like one, how do you contextualize that? And then two, is there a particular position where you feel like that complicates the most our ability to view what these guys are athletes? Like, a lot of edge guys don't do the three cone anymore, or like corners maybe not running certain drills. Like, which position do you think it complicates the most from our point of view?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And when they did the drills at night 3-4 years ago, none of the running backs did any of the three cone or short shuttle. Like they just, as a whole, decided we're not doing it because of you're making us sit around all day and then do everything at 9 o'clock at night, and they kind of push back on that a little bit. I would say because certain drills are more important for certain positions. Like corner, for example. If a guy's not running a 40-yard dash, that's like, okay, what's going on here? Why are you
Big
skipping the
blinking
40-yard
lights.
dash? Yes, very much so. It's a stopwatch position. And there's some corners in this draft where I'm worried they might be skipping the 40-yard dash. And if they do, okay, I mean that kind of tells you something. So yeah, it's for certain positions, you want to see them do everything. For other positions, maybe it's okay if they skip a drill here or there. But it's something that I think is never going to go away because some guys they do enough training with the agents and they know what these guys are going to do time wise. So if the times aren't good enough in training, they're not going to let them do it at the combine, and so that does complicate things. But maybe it tells you a little bit something too about if a guy does skip a drill. Okay, well, maybe they're doing it for a specific reason.
When you look back, Dane, it doesn't even have to be the last 15 years, but the last like several years. Who were the workouts when you guys were sitting up there in the stands that you could kind of feel like the murmur come over the crowd? Just like not just in one individual thing, but like over the course of
Yeah.
the day. I'm sure there were a couple guys that stick out just in overall
Oh
the
yeah.
totality of what they did.
I mean, a lot of Georgia guys, because the 1 year with Travon Walker and then Devontae Wyatt was crazy. It just so happens that Jordan Davis was crazier. So because Jordan Davis was like a 4.77 in the 40 at his size, was crazy. Um, Nolan Smith the next year was unbelievable. His 10-yard split, I think it was 147, I believe. So, I mean, anything under a 1.6 is unbelievable for a 10-yard split. I mean, Von Miller was 1.59. To get under 1.5 is nuts. And Nolan Smith, the way he was moving, the 4.3 speed, the 10-yard split at that size. I mean, he is undersized for a pass rusher. I think he weighed in maybe 238 at the combine. But when you have that type of juice, I couldn't believe he fell as far as he did in the first round, fell right into the lap of the Eagles. And of course, we saw how that manifested itself on the field this year, especially down the stretch in the playoffs. I mean, when you have that type of juice, you're going to be able to get to the quarterback. And, that was something that those Georgia defenders, those 2 years really stood out.
It's funny, over the course of this conversation, the two things that have stuck out to me are observations about current NFL players. Like you saying that Jared Verse weighs 255, I was like, Jared Verse only weighs 255?
He looks
When you think
270.
about the way that he plays and just the play
Right.
style, he feels like a 270 player. And then when you think about Nolan Smith, there's moments that stand out to Nolan Smith to me from this season. Obviously, the juice as a pass rusher down the stretch is incredible, but I'm thinking about like those plays where he's taking on pullers in multiple playoff games at 230. And so if I'm trying to connect the dots here, I guess I'm just realizing that my favorite NFL players are edge guys who play like they're 25 pounds heavier than they are.
Yeah. Verse was 254 at the combine last year.
Wow.
If
So,
you would ask me how much is Jared Verse weigh, my answer would have been immediately been 270.
I would have immediately been like, what does Zadarius Smith weigh? It's probably about that.
right. That's how he plays. It's
yes.
so much power, and it comes from his explosiveness. I mean, it is fun to watch. And yeah, because Verse actually had a better 10-yard split than Dallas Turner did, than a lot of those guys that we thought were going to be freaky testers. Verse helped himself for sure with 10-yard split and the 40-yard dash.
So let's get back to what we're watching next week. Those are the guys who are going to own it. Those are the guys that are at the top of the draft that are likely in your top 10, top 15. I want to go like a tier down from there and just talk about guys who are going to turn heads a little bit. Players who maybe aren't household names to even the people who are following the draft discourse that maybe are going to surprise some people with what they're going to do testing wise in Indianapolis. Where would you start that group?
Let's start with South Carolina safety Nick Emmanwori, who, I mean, he's in my top 30, so it's not like this is not a new name. But I don't
think this is important to point out, though. Your top 30, your top 15, your top 20, you know for the most part how these guys are going to test. And so the physical traits are baked into what you're doing. And I think for some people, they're going to be players that are higher than they might seem based on their production, but you already have some of the picture filled in. The testing is going to fill in some of the picture for these people who are not as far along in the process. So even if you have them in the top 30, I still think it's worth pointing out why you do and maybe how we're going to close the gap between the perception from some of these guys and what they actually are as prospects.
No doubt. And yeah, exactly. Shamar Stewart being the perfect example of that, being a top 10 player on the board, even though the stats don't back that up. Even Worry is a guy that is a little streaky in his play, but he's 6'3". He's listed. We don't have the verified measurements on him, so it'll be interesting to get those. But he's listed at 6'3", 227 pounds. So a big safety. He on tape, he is crazy.
Derrek's face,
linebacker.
Right
yeah, basically. So I'm told he might get into the 4.3s with his 40-yard dash. And when you see his range, you see that he's a fast guy. His Corey, Bruce Feldman does his Freaks article every year. In the summer, his jumps were 11.4 in the broad, 42-inch in the vert. Both of those might be the best we see this year. And if you're running, yeah, exactly. And if you're running in anything close to the 4.3s at that size, that's going to give you a little bit of boost. So Nick Emmanwori, he's on the short list with Jahad Campbell and Shamar Stewart and these other guys of players who might really kind of put a charge into the buzz around them as prospects. So he's definitely one. Let's talk about who's going to run the fastest 40. That's something that's always interesting. Last year, Xavier Worthy coming in had to be one of the favorites. This year, I think the favorite is Georgia's wide receiver, Arian Smith. 6 foot, 175 pounds. He was a high-level track athlete in high school. He was nationally ranked in the sprints and the jumps. His long jump in high school, he won a state championship, the best high school long jump in this draft class, just ahead of Malachi Starks, who's the higher-rated Georgia player. But with Smith, he also ran track at Georgia, and in the 100 meters, he had a 10:10. Which anything in the tens, anything under 11 seconds in the 100 meters is just blazing. And to have a 10:10 is crazy. That easily translates to a 4.3, maybe even lower. So Arian Smith, very interested to see what he does in the 40. Darian Porter from Iowa State is a really fascinating prospect. He bounced between receiver and corner at Iowa State. He's been there the last 6 years. He's a 6-year senior. He struggled to find a role until this last year at corner. 6'2 and a half, 197 pounds, 33 and a quarter inch arms, and he's going to fly. In high school, he set the Iowa all-time record in the 400 meters. He won, in his best 100 meters was 10.68 at the Senior Bowl. So Zebra Technology has been tracking player speed the last 8 years. This year, Porter clocked a 22.17 mile per hour. That's the second fastest that they've tracked over the last 8 years at that event. Tariq Woolen was the only guy that was faster, and he ran a 4.26 in the 40-yard dash. So Darian Porter, I think he's going to be really fascinating. The special teams profile will help him a lot during the evaluation, just because he blocked 4 punts. He had a field goal block this past year. I know multiple teams that have third-round grades on him. So having a strong combine is just really going to back that up and reinforce why, even though there are some red flags on his report, why he should be in that top 100 conversation.
I'm curious with Emanwari how we parse that sort of athleticism at safety in particular. Because I do think it's, along with linebacker, it's probably the position where I don't want to say athleticism matters the least, but if you look at the guys who ultimately become successful, it's not necessarily as correlated as it would be with some of these other positions, where if you lined up the best defensive ends and pass rushers in the league, most of them are the best athletes, right? You go back and look at Myles Garrett's testing and some of the other guys. At safety, that's just not normally the case. So if you're looking at somebody like Emanwari, what do you think the conversation is with the team that maybe is enticed with he's able to do physically, but that is the biggest selling point?
I think it's making sure you have a clear role for him in your defense. Do you want to use him? I feel like we have this conversation a lot with all these safeties, right? All the safeties that are a little freaky, a little different, Kyle Hamilton and like all these guys that are just a little bit different than your prototypical safety. And Emanwari is going to fit in that bucket because of just how much of a freak he is. Size, speed, strength. Personally, I like him when he is closer to the football. I want him where he can blitz, he can be an eraser versus the run, he can man up with tight ends, backs in coverage. That's where I like him the best as opposed to a single high post safety. That's where I think some of the inconsistent reads and anticipation come in. But, you're going to bet on that athleticism all day and then talk your defensive coordinator into making sure you have a spot for him.
So you feel like the fluidity is not an issue. It's more like the instincts and the mental stuff more than it is like his ability to move in space. So you feel like he can play man coverage on guys in space like that.
There are times where I think some body tightness shows up just in terms of because he flies with the football. And so there are times where maybe his angle's a little bit off and he's a little stiff trying to redirect and course correct that angle. And so you see that a little bit. But so I wouldn't say that he's, super fluid, but I wouldn't say he's a total stiff either. He's kind of somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, this is like 20 years ago now, but I just think about like Taylor Mays, right? Like these 230-pound safeties who run really fast in a straight line, but if you ask them to change direction, then things get a little bit dicey.
Yeah, I think he's better than that. Like he is not a guy that we need to hide him or we need to stick him at linebacker or anything like that. Like he can cover a lot of ground quickly. He just might not be as fluid as maybe some of your top safeties in comparison purposes.
He sounds
Go
more
ahead.
like a Jeremy Chin or something like that, where it's like you can
Right.
man him up on these guys, get him close to the line of scrimmage. Don't know how much you want him playing like 14 yards deep.
I'm curious, Dane, as you look at just the on-field drills specifically, not even stuff that's timed, but like the real sicko that we're talking about here, like how guys are moving in offensive line drills, things like that. What are the on-field tests that you feel like matter the most for people in a scouting position that are just watching how guys are actually moving when they're being put in these situations?
And like we've talked about, the combine is one big cross-checking exercise. So I think the main thing during these drills is just making sure that the movements match what you see on tape. So, a great example, the offensive and defensive linemen, they go through the wave drill. The
Mhm.
player starts on the ground, face first. They have to pop up, show their change of direction. The coach is going to kind of point the ball in the direction they want them to move. And you have to be sudden. You have to quickly transfer your weight. It shows how loose you are. It also shows endurance. There are a lot of guys that are huffing and puffing by the time, and this is only a, I don't know, 8-second, 9-second, 10-second type of drill, but you're moving so fast, you're changing direction so quickly that a lot of guys, they get those heavy legs and they finish slow. And so that's something that scouts look for too. Are they stiff? Are they slipping all over the place when they're trying to redirect? Watching, Byron Murphy, good example last year from Texas, first round pick of the Seahawks. Watching him go through that drill last year was just like, oh yeah, okay, this guy is something different. I mean, the way he was moving was silly. For receivers, you think of the gauntlet. That is such a great drill to watch. The body control, because you have to stay on that straight line. Do they use their body to finish? Do they trust their hands? One of the main things I look for is, do they slow at the catch point? Some guys, they start full speed, but then they slow down so they can try and frame the ball, speed back up, and then slow down, try to catch, just to want to make sure they don't drop the ball. But scouts, they want to see full speed the entire way. I remember Zay Flowers was one of those guys. He just crushed it a couple years ago. Full speed the entire way, start to finish. There's no weaving, strong hands. Zay was, in retrospect, is like, man, kicking myself for not having him higher, because not just that drill specifically, but everything that he put together was just phenomenal. So again, you're looking for the workouts to match the tape, both as athletes, as movers, but then also the position specific stuff too, with, do they trust their hands, that type of thing. So, it's another thing that I pay attention to, just being there in the stadium, in the stands, which players are the leaders of the group? Which ones, because all these guys are alpha athletes, right? So which ones are the top competitors who are elevating the levels of everybody around them? And it's not just who's the loudest, but maybe, who's working together with other guys, who's following directions, there's a lot of different tidbits like that maybe we don't necessarily get on TV.
The Zay Flowers thing makes me so happy because I remember that summer at training camp, that was the one guy when I was talking to coaches, GMs, everything about the draft process. I was like, am I insane or is that guy really good? And there were I remember one team that picked right after that. And it was like, we were heartbroken. Like I wanted him so bad. And I was like, God, that makes me feel so much better. Derek hates Zay Flowers. So this is like an ongoing battle that we have on this show.
It's like a battle of just like your particular things that you like at certain skill sets. I love big receiver catch the football. Zay
Right.
Flowers is not big receiver catch the football, so I struggle with him at times. But
No, I'm
speaking
with
of
you.
the
I'm with you. I get it.
yeah,
Yeah, I was the same
was
way.
that
Like, I
why you
didn't.
weren't quite as high on
Yeah,
him?
because
Yeah,
usually I don't go for receivers that are undersized, and
yeah.
I mean, he was like, I don't know, 30 on my board or something like that. Like, I didn't have him, too low, but in retrospect, it's like, okay, this is where I need to continue getting better about certain guys just outplay the measurables.
I'm surrounded by sizes on this show. It's been the case since I started doing the show. Every single one of you guys is prejudiced against small receivers, and I feel like I'm having to stand on the table for the little guy over here.
Nah, give
Uh,
me the Drake Londons, the T Higgins. I'll pay T Higgins $30 million if the Bengals won't do it.
one more guy I want to mention for guys that I think could break out as with their testing on the offensive line. Charles Grant from William and Mary, a little bit of a late bloomer because he was not a football guy growing up. Didn't really start till his junior year in high school. He was like 240 pounds when he got to William and Mary, and he's a little bit of a project, but man, he moves well. His 10-yard split, his agility stuff should be really impressive. He wasn't able to do the Senior Bowl because of a late season injury, and so I think that's kind of kept maybe people have been a little bit quiet on him. But I think there'll be some buzz picking up after the way the people see him move in Indianapolis.
And Dane, I actually wanted to ask you about one more guy who might make a name for themselves. And I know he's already top 50 on your board.
Mm-hmm.
But Carson Schlesinger, the UCLA linebacker,
One of
how
my
fast
favorites.
can he run this week? Because he seems, when I popped on the tape,
He
it was like three
yeah.
plays in. This dude can roll.
I mean, give me a guy with instincts and speed, and that's a great foundation for a linebacker. Yeah, he is one of my 5 favorite players in the draft. I mean, he just the way he moves is crazy, and he's a walk on. Like he this is his
Really?
first year as a starter. Literally has 10 starts to his name, but in nine of those starts, he has double digit tackles. It is crazy how quickly he keys, diagnoses, goes, and he plays so fast. He'll make plays 40 yards down the field. He's a lot of fun to watch. So I think I don't know, and maybe I should have him higher. It's just a matter of okay, because he's a little bit light. That's the knock on him is how is he going to be taking on contact? And then how early do you take an off ball linebacker like that who's a little bit light taking on contact? And it doesn't have maybe the best resume in terms of been doing it for a long time. But yeah, I mean he's a top 50 pick all day. I'm not sure what the comp is. I don't think I haven't come up with a true apples to apples comp that I love. But yeah, he's a really good player who should run. I mean under 4.65 somewhere.
He seemed to me very like Deion Jones ish, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know how well he takes on blocks, but the speed, the instincts, some of his coverage
Right.
ability is just like insane. And if you
It is.
obviously Deion Jones only had like a 2-3 year peak, but if you can get that peak for longer, then that's absolutely worth a top 50 pick.
This is
Yeah. No,
surprising
no
to me,
doubt.
Derek, because
Why?
typically you don't like these
I
smaller,
usually
undersized
don't.
linebackers
I
who aren't
usually
thumpers.
don't.
So the idea that you're enamored with this guy is kind of shocking to me.
I don't know. There was something about it where he triggers, like Dane said, he triggers so fast and the
Yeah.
speed is so jarring that it was like, all right, even if I don't love the archetype, he is so good outside of it that I kind of just threw my hands up. I was like, all right, I'm in.
He is just a tractor beam to the football. And the tackle production is crazy with him. Yeah, he put himself in the top 50 mix this year, no doubt.
The idea that you're just going to be trashing Terrell Bernard all year because he's this
And this
undersized
guy's the same
linebacker, and then
player.
now this guy's like the apple of your eye. Just what a hypocrite you are over here. This
I
this
know.
this UCLA linebacker has already become like the prize of the football nerd online community. Solak was talking about him. I
Mhm.
could just see the
Yeah.
glee and the glint in both of your eyes already. I feel like this is going to be one of the darlings of this cycle. All right, let's get into the one last thing I wanted to talk about here. This is a big bucket on purpose because I think that I want to be able to slot in a few different big picture questions with this. Dan, I wanted to just ask you about the guys you feel like have the most at stake in Indianapolis this year. And this is mostly going to be rooted in the stuff we were talking about at the beginning. Guys that have a lot to gain through the interviews, guys that have a lot to gain or lose based on the medical testing. So let's start with the quarterbacks here because
Hmm.
obviously the intangible aspects of this are going to be really important. As you look at this year's quarterback group and you think about who has the most to gain or lose from their experience in Indianapolis, where would you start that?
I mean, you've got to start at the top with the top 2 guys, right? Cam Ward, Shador Sanders, 2 guys that are, um, have a chance to be top 10 picks, but are not viewed as for example, like we've talked about, if they were in last year's draft, they go anywhere from quarterback 4 to quarterback 7. It's just they're not viewed as guys that are going to get you super excited, but there's at least you can see a path where they're going to be long-term NFL starters. And so, how does the combine just change the narrative around these 2 guys, if at all? based off of the interviews, based off of what they do on the field. If they throw, with Shador Sanders, for example, okay, meeting with teams, how do those interviews go? When they press him on certain things, how does that go? The interview process is going to be huge for Shador. Just meeting with offensive coordinators, meeting with head coaches, and then Cam Ward as well. Just making sure that he has the leadership voice that you want. Just getting, it's kind of just a check-in about where he is in his development in terms of reading coverages and understanding, what type of verbiage were they using in their playbook, and just trying to get a better sense for who they are. What's their mental capacity? How do they learn? All these different things. A lot of these things, the area scouts have already kind of communicated with the team, the GM, but so they have kind of a head start going into this. But how they will answer some of these questions is going to be a huge thing. And also, but just the on-field stuff, like with Shador, if he throws, he will be throwing right next to Tyler Shuck from Louisville, who has a monster arm, a legit power arm, where Sanders does not. He has an average arm at best. And so how does that look one after the other? Like I said, when these guys are going through these drills one after another, it really helps with just the context and a frame of reference. And so what does that do when the ball's not exploding off Shador's hand? Like, because it doesn't. That's just, I think teams already know that, but how will it look actually on the field at Lucas Oil Stadium if Shador decides to throw?
That's good to know, because one of the things I was going to ask you is, does it matter if these guys throw anymore? Do teams care? Are they really taking anything away from the on-field throwing workouts? So, like, where do you sit with that, just as like a larger question?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that, like, I don't think people remember, did Bryce Young throw? Did CJ Stroud throw? Like, if you asked
Well, I remember that because people were enamored with how CJ Stroud threw at the combine.
Yeah. Well, but I think the general football fan, I don't think they'd be able to tell you that, oh yeah, Bryce Young didn't, and oh yeah, CJ Stroud did. Like, I don't think that maybe that it's stuck with the general football fan.
I think that's right.
But when it comes to NFL teams, they want to see everybody throw, obviously. But if they don't, I don't think it's as much of a red flag as maybe some people will make it out to be. You might press them on it a little bit and ask them why you don't want to compete, that kind of thing. But it'll be interesting with both these guys. Sometimes it comes down to, do they feel like they have leverage where they don't need to throw? And I don't think either of these guys necessarily have the leverage to make that decision. If I'm one of them, I'm looking to go out and prove why, hey, this is why I should be a top 10 pick. Shador Sanders is not a lock top 10 pick in this draft. Yeah, he absolutely could go third to the Giants, sixth to the Raiders, but in no way is he a lock to go that high. And it's funny because if Anthony Richardson was a top 4 pick in when we look back at this in history, but if the Colts don't take him at 4, who knows? He could have been a 22nd pick. It just, when you just don't know how that's going to play out. If Shador doesn't go 6, who knows where he might fall? He might fall to 18 in Seattle or, Pittsburgh, or who knows? And so if I'm one of these guys, I want as many bites at the apple to show why I belong to be a top 5 pick, top 6 pick.
Derrik, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. I don't want to dig into this right now, but I just want to take your temperature a little bit. Have you watched the quarterbacks yet?
I watched them over the summer, and then I watched them a little bit early in the season, but I do have like a pretty clear where I stand on QB1. And I think Cam Ward's better. I think he's just more talented. I like the way that he plays a little bit more. I will typically default to guy who plays a little bit like an untamed horse, and we need to walk him back a little bit, and that's a little bit more Cam Ward. But the other thing I do think that's fascinating about Ward, and this is kind of what attracted me to Lamar Jackson as a prospect, Cam Ward wasn't really a throwing quarterback in high school. And then by the time he gets to Incarnate Word, he obviously levels up there and is able to go to Washington State, levels up again, is able to go to Miami, and then plays really well at Miami. So there's something to me that is very fascinating about a guy who consistently gets better. So even if he has warts, it speaks to me the idea of okay, he's obviously doing something right to continue getting better opportunities. And then he's already shown that he can continue to get better. And that's an underrated skill about playing in the NFL, is that you have to consistently evolve.
That's a little morsel, because we are going to have that conversation in earnest here in about, I don't know, a month and a half. So table that for now. So Dane, other than the quarterbacks, I'm curious who in your mind you think has the most to lose or gain in Indy this week based on the medicals and the interviews?
And this might be the most crowded category, just because for different reasons. For example, Will Campbell, LSU offensive tackle. I know it sounds trivial, but talking about eighths of an inch and all of that, the fact is it matters. And for Will Campbell, when he stretches out that arm from shoulder to fingertip, he is hoping that it's going to show at least 33 inches for the arm length. And, it's, we can have the debate about whether arm length, how much it matters and all of that. But the fact is, teams have thresholds for offensive tackles and arm length. Ideally, they want 34, 35-inch arms, but 33 is passable, where 32 and 3/4, maybe that's not going to work. So for Will Campbell, and I know teams want to keep Will Campbell at tackle. Okay, this isn't like a situation where I think they knew early on Peter Skoronski was going to be a guard. For most teams, Peter Skoronski was a guard on their board. Will Campbell, I checked with 10 teams over the last few weeks. They all have Will Campbell on the board as a tackle. And so they'd like to keep him there. Will that change after the combine? We'll have to see. I mean, the tape says he can do it. In the last 30 games as an SEC left tackle, he gave up 2 sacks. So, yeah, you wish he had 34, 35-inch arms. He doesn't. It's closer to 33. How close? We'll see. I mean, Rashawn Slater at exactly 33-inch arms. Penei Sewell was 33 1/4. So, again, obviously you want longer arms. When you're scouting tackles, though, it should be about the feet. It should be about the hand timing. And I think that's where Campbell is. That's why I think he's being fine at tackle, because he has the feet. He has the timing. He has the torque and the power. We'll see how the arm length plays out, but hopefully he hits that 33 number where teams aren't going to agonize about, okay, do we have to move him or not?
Slater was at 33.
Yeah.
Caleb McGarry was just under 33. I'm just looking at guys who played tackle for extended periods of time who are around that range. Alaric Jackson was 32.5. Obviously, he wasn't somebody that was drafted high, but he became a long-term starter at tackle. A lot of the other guys we're talking about here that were classified as offensive tackles at the combine that were around that number ultimately did shift inside to guard. I'm looking at Sam Cosmi. I'm looking at Alex Kappa, Will Fries, even Jordan Morgan, who potentially could play tackle later, was a guard as a rookie. So that obviously is the line. And, there are other guys that I think if you look at it, they played tackle, but ultimately struggled because of that length. Like Tyson Brilo is in this list where he had 33-inch arms. I think length ended up becoming sort of an issue for him. So it may seem trivial, but there is a reason that threshold exists, because there just aren't that many guys who sit under it who have been long-term starters at tackle.
It will influence where he is, how early he is drafted, because if you have to move him to guard, some teams just aren't going to draft an interior offensive lineman as high as they would draft a tackle. Right or wrong, that's just how it is. And so specifically, I'm looking at the Patriots at 4. If they don't get the tackle they want in free agency, or even if they do and they want to double up and they want to just overload on the offensive line, which is not the worst strategy, Will Campbell will be in the mix at number 4 as long as they feel confident that he is a tackle. And that's where the combine will kind of flush out some of those ideas. So that'll be big for him. Jedi Barron, the Texas defensive back, he's right around 5'11", 190. The size is average. Scouts are worried about the length. He might come in under 30-inch arms, and that's another threshold. When you're talking about DBs, a lot of teams look at anything shorter than 32, they're out. So anything under 30 is going to be a problem. And, the speed is, we'll see what the speed is too. That'll be kind of a question mark. He doesn't play like a 4.3 athlete. If he gets anywhere in the 4.4s, I think that'll be great time for him. If he's in the 4.5s, again, that's where you start talking about, all right, where do we feel comfortable with him? He's an easy player to like on film. He has the versatility that you love, plays the nickel, played outside corner. But if he is under 30-inch arms, if he runs a 4.51, then all of a sudden teams are going to be like, all right, well, we don't love him as an outside corner. He might be a nickel only. And, you start to poke holes in him, and all of a sudden he's available in the mid-second round like a Brian Branch. And so ideally you hope that it turns out like that, but a big combine would be huge for Jedi Barron. We got
on that front with the length for corners, guys like Trent McDuffie were just under 30 inches. Roger McCreary had very famously short arms. And again, both of those guys ultimately moved to the slot early on, or tested crazy in other
Yeah.
areas.
McDuffie was a 4-3 guy, and so that, kind of his saving grace. And yeah, it is. And every team looks at it a little bit differently. With Barron, he has a lot of the stuff that you want, a lot of make it stuff. But with it, when teams have strict size thresholds, they stay true to that. So I think it's going to be really interesting with Barron in particular. At receiver, this is such an interesting wide receiver group because we don't have that Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, guys at the top, but we're still going to have 4 or 5 receivers that probably go in the first round. But how early do they go? And the combine could help determine that. Tet McMillan from Arizona, over under 4.53 for his 40-yard dash. What is he? Because that's not vertical speed's not really his the strength to his game. I mean, he's slender. He wins jump balls. He's like a Gumby-ish version of T. Higgins. That's how he plays, how he wins. But T. Higgins, he did not run well at all. So can McMillan at least get closer to a 4.50, that type of time? Luther Burden from Missouri, Emeka Ibuka, and then Golden from Texas. So can those other 3 guys, can they test well to really cement themselves as, hey, we're first round players. If you need help at receiver, we can be those guys for you. So the receivers, I think, more than usual. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't even work out last year because he knew he didn't have to. I guess also this is a good time to talk about Travis Hunter. Do we have, we've gone this long without talking about the player who might go number 1 overall. Will he work out in Indianapolis? He's listed as a corner on the combine invite list, which not a big, people I think overreacting to that. Who cares? I mean, teams are going to request that he works out at receiver as well. He will probably be more than happy to do that. He wants to play both ways. But it'll be interesting with Travis Hunter. Does he work out? Does he feel like he needs to? And then also just the interviews, when teams really push him on, okay, offense or defense, and you can't say both. Where do you want to play? How does that play into how teams plan to use him? The teams at the top of the draft that potentially draft him. So Travis Hunter is going to be a really interesting one this week.
Are there other skill position guys you're curious about, whether they're running backs, tight ends, guys you just want to see cross certain thresholds that maybe you just have a slight hesitation about, or again, you want to fill in the picture a little bit?
Yeah, no doubt. I think Cam Scattaboo at running back, not only a fun name to say, he's a fun guy to watch. Arizona State, he's not fast. He's not going to run a 4.3, 4.4. Can he get under a 4.57? I think is kind of maybe the benchmark for him. So even though the 40 might not look great, it might be okay. How do the other drills look? The short area stuff. He catches the ball really well, so I think that'll show up. Cam Scattaboo, I think, is going to have this will be a big opportunity for him. Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State. Travion Henderson is more of the speed back from Ohio State, where Judkins is more the power guy. But can Judkins go out there and roll out a 4.4 in the 40-yard dash? He'll really help himself if he can do that. Tez Johnson.
Quinshon Judkins is an amazing name. That is an incredible name.
And he plays, like, when you picture a guy named Quinshon Judkins, he plays like that. I mean, he will run guys over. He's an attitude type of back, and I think that shows in his play. At receiver, so we talked earlier about undersized guys and what to do with them. And another example of that, where you try to learn, Tank Dell, who I liked, but I didn't love because, again, the size. Tez Johnson is kind of in that similar bucket where he is literally 155 pounds. And it's like, okay, what do you like? He gets open and he has speed. But what do you do with a guy like that? And so for him, why I mentioned him for like the most at stake, he better test well, because if you're going to draft a 155-pound receiver, you better have the 4.3 to go with it. You better have these other numbers in the testing. He doesn't play great through contact, but if guys can't cover him, if he gets open whenever he wants, then maybe it doesn't matter as much. So, and it's funny, you think about Tank Dell being a smaller guy, he was 10 pounds heavier than Tez Johnson. So that'll be a really interesting one for him. On the defensive side, two DBs I've got my eye on for kind of, I want to see you prove it on the field. Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, safety, who just the ball finds him. And at a certain point, you're like, all right, maybe this isn't a coincidence. I think 13 picks over the last 2 years. But why scouts have been kind of lukewarm on him is because average size, average speed. And he's one of those guys that had to pull out of the Senior Bowl because Notre Dame playing in a national title game. So preparing for the combine, what does he look like? What does the speed look like? What are the verified measurements on him? Because I think he is in my 40s on my top 50.
It's
But
46 right now.
yeah. So how he tests, how he looks, moving around out there, that's something that could really help him. Noel Williams from Cal reminds me a lot of another Cal DB, Cam Bynum, when he was coming out. Cam Bynum was a really good player. He just couldn't run. And so, but we've seen him carve out a role as a safety with the Vikings. So Noel Williams is kind of the same way, where he is a junkyard dog. He's smart. He's tough. He's competitive. He's not a speed type of guy. And so what does that look like in the 40-yard dash? And what does that mean for his future in the NFL? So if he runs a 4.49, I think he goes top 100. But if he runs a 4.55, then all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, maybe we take a chance on him on day 3. I think teams will look at that a little bit differently. So plenty of names here of guys that maybe have something on the line with these drills.
Noel Williams is 91 on your big board right now. Just throwing
Yeah.
that out there for context for people. The last thing I want to wrap up with here, some of the intangible stuff. Well, I guess medical stuff is tangible, but it's not on field
Right.
work. So some of the things that are going to happen behind closed doors, whether it's the interviews or the medical, are there guys that you feel like have particularly big weeks ahead of them in terms of what is there to gain or lose?
Yeah, and this is, again, we started off this conversation by saying how important the combine was for these two reasons. Find out more about the medicals, more about the character stuff. And the medicals are interesting because, so the area scout, he's been on campus, the school calls. He will communicate with the team doctor and the medical staff what the injury history is. So the doctor goes into these meetings, these examinations, with a frame of reference about what we need to be looking at. And I was actually talking to a GM last week who said he gave his trainer a list of 12 guys that he really likes and has particularly want to know what's the medical on these guys. So it's just interesting how that works. It's a really rigorous process because say there's a player with a knee issue, that knee might be looked at over 50 times in a couple days, because there's 32 teams, 32 physicians, 32 trainers, junior doctors, junior staff, all these different people. So, it's a rigorous process. And I think it's important to remember that almost like a scout, every doctor is a little bit different with how their medical opinions. And then, consequently, each team's different with how they respond to some of those injuries. Every team's different with how they look at risk with injury. So a lot of teams use just a numbering system, 1 through 5. If a player has a 1 or a 2, they're fine. 3 is fine for most teams. But if you have a 4 or 5, more than likely you're off the board. And, there are always some guys that pop up that are, okay, I didn't know that there was a knee issue, or maybe there's arthritis. There's a degenerative problem with something with that player. A couple of the guys this year who have money to be gained, or it just a lot hinges on those medical evaluations. First, Josh Simmons, Ohio State left tackle. Back in October, I wrote about this on The Athletic. He was trending towards being OT1 in this draft. His body control, his movements were just outstanding. Then in the Oregon game, non-contact patella injury. So had surgery. I'm told that he is on pace to be cleared to work out in April. He plans to have a private workout for NFL teams before the draft in April. But as teams look at the knee at the combine, just to understand the rehab, the recovery, the prognosis, that'll be a big one, because again, this is a player who, if healthy, he's a top 10 player in this draft. So he's going to have a discount sticker on him, but how much? Is he as simple as he's not going to get out of the top 15, top 20, or is it more late first round, or is there even a more bigger issue that maybe we don't know about? So that'll be big for Josh Simmons. Benjamin Morrison, the corner from Notre Dame, had a hip injury, a lateral tear. It's actually a second one. He had one in high school too, which I don't think a lot of people know about. And so how do you, like, I don't know. The idea of a corner having 2 hip surgeries before he's 22 years old is just weird. So how do teams, what are the doctors, how do they convey that to NFL teams about it being a recurring issue or something they need to worry about long term? That'll be something with Benjamin Morrison they have to look at. A couple offensive linemen. Seth McLaughlin from Ohio State had an Achilles injury. He was a center that was looking like a top 100 pick before his Achilles injury. That'll be a big one. Tate Ratledge from Georgia. Cam Williams from Texas had a knee issue. And so teams are a little maybe worried about long term if there's any issues with the knee, especially for a guy that's 340 pounds. So Cam Williams is a guy that has first round talent, but he's young. We've had to factor in the medical stuff. So that'll be big for Cam Williams. And then
any interview stuff that you're looking at.
So this is the conversation that's the toughest to have because of just I struggle with quote unquote character concerns because it's most of it's secondhand info, and sometimes it's hard to contextualize what it means for a player's draft grade. And every situation is very different. Sometimes it's easy to understand the issue. Sometimes it's like, okay, well, he was arrested for this. There's a criminal record for this. There is suspended for this. Like sometimes we don't need a ton of context where we know, but a lot of situations we need the context of what's really going on. Some issues are a lot more subtle. And so with this draft, there's 3 defensive linemen in the first round where I'll just say teams are doing extra work to try and figure them out, make sure they're comfortable with the person, with the background. Not saying that, they're off the board or anything like that, but they're doing extra work. One of those players has been in the news recently, James Pierce from Tennessee. The feedback from scouts has been really mixed. And I think the bottom line is how one scout described it. Teams just want to be convinced that they know who you are. They want to understand what makes you tick. And right now, that's a big question mark with Pierce. And so that's something that felt like was an issue with the coaching staff at Tennessee, and teams just want to be convinced about who he is. So based on talent, he should go in the top 15 picks. But, if he fell to the second round, I don't think it'd be a huge shock to anybody. Mike Green from Marshall, who had a terrific Senior Bowl. I think he's 12th on my top 100. The talent says he's a first-round guy. There's an incident at Virginia that led to his dismissal. It's nothing new that teams don't already know about. It's not like he's going to be grilled at the combine about this, but it's something that they're going to continue to talk to him about. Make sure they're comfortable with his explanation, and then just their own background work on it. And then Walter Nolan, defensive tackle, Ole Miss. Some of the scout feedback or the feedback from the team to scouts was positive from Ole Miss, a lot more positive than what Texas A&M was saying. So, I say he's still a guy that they haven't figured out 100% yet, but he did a nice job at the Senior Bowl, and I think there's some optimism there. One other defensive lineman that I think character has come up is LSU's Braden Swinson, who he was suspended for the first half of the Florida game, and he butted heads with some coaches. And so it's basically a maturity thing with him. Teams aren't scared off by any means, but every interview is going to be so important for him to make sure the best version of himself is being portrayed to NFL coaches and GMs, especially because he didn't play in the Shrine Bowl. He bailed at the last minute. So he missed a whole week of interviews down there in Dallas. So, the combine is where teams are going to get a chance to really talk to him and figure out what makes him tick. And, just talking about character stuff, I go back to last year, 2 guys that we talked about a lot with the quote unquote character concerns were 2 examples of guys that went in different directions. Tavondre Sweat, the big defensive tackle from Texas, he was off boards, plenty of boards around the league. And, we talked about that before the draft. Just where would he go? He would first round on, if you just watch his 2023 tape at Texas, first round pick. But when you factor in everything else behind the scenes, he was close to 400 pounds at one point, party animal, DUI, all that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, well, he might fall to day 3 now. Titans still take him top 40. And based off his rookie year, he lived up to it. Now, I mean, obviously time will tell if he continues to do that, but they obviously felt comfortable with the
They did a
person.
lot of work. They did a
They
lot
must
of
have.
additional work. They
Right.
had a whole crew to go down and see him and spend time. I mean, they really did their homework before they were willing to pull the trigger on that.
And that is a great example of a guy that there's plenty of red flags, but why you do that extra homework to be comfortable with, a guy that maybe some guys are just young and make silly mistakes. It happens. On the flip side, the Bengals drafted wide receiver Jermaine Burton mid-third round ahead of some guys that had some receivers that had some really good rookie years. And based on the talent, you get it. It's understandable, but the character was a mess. Every team knew it. And based off of how last year went, sounds like it's still an issue with Cincinnati. They called him out publicly about it. So, hopefully he's able to kind of get it turned around. But sometimes the character stuff, it follows you to the NFL.
I want people who listen to this show to go count how many names Dane mentioned over the last 75 minutes.
Somebody
Just
will do it. Don't say that.
how many guys were mentioned over the last 75 minutes? The goal of this was for you guys to go into the combine with a frame of reference about the guys to watch, what's going to matter, who has something at stake, who's going to own this week, what are the names that we're going to be coming out of Indianapolis talking about or thinking about, or the names you should be coming out of Indianapolis talking about or thinking about. And the fact that we just downloaded like 80 names directly to your draft hard drive, that was the goal of what we're trying to do today. And I think we accomplished that.
And I was trying to keep it concise because, again, there's always more players to talk about. We could go for another hour if we wanted to, but that's I think the headlines about, the guys that should show out, the freaks that should test like freaks. And I'm sure we'll get a few surprises too. Maybe some guys that we didn't expect to run as well as they did, or so we'll have plenty to talk about when we kind of wrap this all up after Indianapolis.
Derrik, is this your first show with Dane?
Yes, it is. Which is funny because I listened to every single show him and Nate did last year, so doing the show with him now is very fun.
Well, it's gonna be fun the next 2 months.
With LeBron for the first time. It's just
right,
exactly. Just watch him go to work.
Did you see the clip of when Luka got traded over there and he's just in awe that he's now with LeBron James? It feels a little bit like that.
I don't know how to respond to that. It's going to be fun. It's the next 2 months are going to be fun as we kind of break these guys down more, and you guys dive into more players. Especially, I can't wait to hear what you guys say about the quarterbacks because it's such a weird quarterback year. And the opinions are all over the place with NFL teams, so I expect opinions to be kind of all over the place when we talk about these guys next.
I'm very excited to dig into that pool, and that will be happening here over the next month or so, over the next 2 months or so, just to give you guys a sense of what the next week or so is going to look like here on the Athletic Football Show. The show is going to be coming out on Friday, so you guys will be listening to this hopefully on Friday over the weekend. On Monday, we will have our next mailbag from our weekly mailbag series that we're doing this offseason, which I already appreciate the work you guys have put into those. I'm already enjoying doing them. It took a week for it to be confirmed that was a good decision on my part. So thank you very, very much for proving me right. Then next week, like Dane mentioned, all of our writers are in Indianapolis for the combine. So we're going to take advantage of that. We did something a couple years ago that I actually really liked that we're going to bring back this year. We're going to talk to, I think it's 9 different beat writers. So that's the goal over the course of that week, just to kind of dig into what we think are the most interesting teams of the offseason, right? So there are some teams that, like the Patriots, they have a top 5 pick and they have $120 million in cap space. Probably should talk about what their offseason is going to look like. There are other teams that have potential pivot points on the board that we have to address. Teams like the Rams, teams like the Bengals. So that's what we're going to do next week. We're going to be chatting with our writers about just the offseasons that we feel like have the most oomph to them. And then coming out of Combine week, so what will be the Monday after the Combine wraps up, I think that's March 3rd, Dane will be back with us to wrap up what the Combine felt like. So that is what the next week to 10 days is going to look like on the Athletic Football Show. After that, we're going to be full steam ahead into free agency preview and coverage before we do a whole week of free agency content. So that is the rough outline for what is going to be coming your guys' way here over the next couple weeks. For now, that is all we got. Sincerely appreciate Dane's time, Derrik's time. That's all we got for today. Appreciate you guys listening. We will talk to you on Monday.